No, well, thank you everybody for coming. What a privilege to be the first talk after the keynote. Just a show of hands, who here knows what SEDs are? Oh, excellent. For those of you that don't worry about it. We're going to go into what those are. And the best part is we have demos and we have duct tape involving in the demos, so you know the demos are going to be good. So before we get into the details and the interesting part for what everybody's here for, just a very brief introduction. I'm Daniel Boteanu, for those that don't know me. I work in the Forensic Technology and Discovery Group with KPMG Canada. And my background actually has been starting in IT security. So deploying systems securely, operating systems securely, that's where I started. And once I got a feel that I mastered that to a certain level, I said, okay, it's all fun trying to deploy and operate systems securely. Now that I know how to do that reasonably well, let me try to see if I can break into stuff. So if I know how people deploy and operate things, and I know the shortcuts that they will take, because everybody has to take shortcuts and everybody has to have a cap at the effort that they spend and the money that they spend, I know what the holes are, things that are left open. So I moved to penetration testing and red teaming and breaking into stuff. And then after I did that for a couple of years, and I said, yeah, now I know how to break into stuff, and I know how hackers break into stuff, and I know how pen testers break into stuff. And you heard the keynote earlier this morning saying that there's two different ways in which hackers hack and pen testers hack. But I said, yeah, I pretty much know how one and the other go about it. It feels interesting now. It's probably a time to move over once again. So then I moved to the forensic investigation. So with the knowledge of how hackers go around, I'm now looking at when there's been hacking incidents or when people do bad things using computers, looking into that and finding that out and catching those bad people. And I have a couple of professional certifications to cover these three areas. And then during my advancement through these various stages, I was always passionate about security research, which is one of the reasons why I'm presenting here, and I'm presenting the result of some security research. Worth mentioning, I'm an organizer for the NorthSec Security Conference and the Hacking Marathon in Montreal. If you've never been to Montreal, it's Europe in North America, so highly encourage you to go there, attend the conference. It's an awesome hacking competition. We only got one mic, so bear with us, please.
Thank you. Yes, one mic, two presenters. It should be an interesting day. So I'm Kevvie Fowler. I'm a partner at KPMG in their cyber practice. I lead two teams. The first one, cybersecurity, helping organizations identify the critical assets and ensure they got the right safeguards in place to actually protect those assets. The other team is a cyber forensic team. So in the event of a suspected intrusion, we will go and investigate, confirm or deny if something happened. If something did happen, we determine what the scope of the compromise is and help organizations recover from that compromise. I'm author of SQL Server Forensic Analysis, Data Breach Preparation and Response, as well as contributing author, meaning I've written chapters for about 6 other security and forensic books. I speak a lot at conferences. I did the Black Hat Vegas conference in 2007. Before I was with a professional services company. Now I'm with KPMG, so I thought I'd be smart to put a suit on. And again, as I mentioned before, I don't see too many other suits out there. But either way, it's the same person, just in a suit. I'm also a developer of quite a few database forensic tools regarding interrogating caches and actually collecting artifacts and analyzing artifacts from within the database management systems. These tools are used from law enforcement agencies across North America, and actually one of the leading banks here in Europe. I'm also a sans lethal forensicator, which is a long convoluted term, meaning I hold a coin that there's a bunch of rules that if someone challenges me, I have to follow a protocol, or else I have to buy rounds at a bar for individuals. I haven't been challenged yet, but if anyone has a coin, then I might be fair games or easy pickings. So what are we going to talk about today? We're going to start off with what are SEDs. Based on the discussion or the question Daniel threw out there earlier, it seems like a lot of people in this room today are already familiar with what self-encrypting drives are. But we're going to take it back to basics for some of you who may not be as intimate with them. We're going to look at typical SED enterprise deployment. So how are organizations actually using SEDs within their enterprise environments? We're then going to get to the meat and potatoes, which is the actual attack scenarios. So we're going to look at how attacks actually occur, and we actually have some live demos, and as Daniel mentioned, duct tape, both for the demo as well for any hecklers we may have in the audience, so be forewarned. We're also going to look at some of the mitigation strategies. So once you see the vulnerability, we think it's important that you understand ways you can actually protect your organization and your personal assets against some of the attacks we'll be stepping through. Then we'll be looking at detection of past exploitation. So it's great to know a vulnerability exists. It's equally as important to go back and try and figure out if you've been popped or owned before. So we're going to cover some of that, then look at some real-world implications. Looking at the session, we do have about 5 or 10 minutes carved out at the end for questions and answers. So if there's any questions, we definitely make sure to get that into the session. Just to start things off, I'm going to talk about the state of data encryption out there. So we had a question by someone saying, is this regarding another vulnerability that just came out last week? And this talk is actually separate than that. But I think it's a great segue into when you look at data encryption as a technology, there's been a number of vulnerabilities for both encryption products in flight as well as encryption products protecting data at rest. A few examples are Logjam, Freak, Poodle, Heartbleed for data in flight, and data at rest would come down to TrueCrypt. Would be one example as well. So a lot of these open source tools and some commercial tools, I'm not going to mention any of the commercial vendors, definitely have a lot of vulnerabilities associated with their products. So technology people have been using, including software people have been using to protect information, definitely people are starting to poke holes in them, and a lot of researchers are definitely spending a lot of time focusing on them. Organizations also are having increasing concerns regarding the access that some governments have reportedly gained within some of these encryption products. So there's talks and there's stories. I'm not going to debate whether they're fact or fiction, but there's a lot of talks regarding some government agencies who have funded security programs to actually introduce flaws or introduce bugs into a lot of these encryption products to grant them access to information that's supposed to be protected. So there's a lot of organizations concerned about that as well. Something else we're seeing in the data breach or the data encryption landscape comes down to a lot of breaches have involved encrypted information, but the organizations, number one, are still disclosing that the breach has occurred. And for instance, if a breach happens, including encrypted passwords, people are still recommending that you actually reset your passwords. And the reason for that is they just don't trust the way the developers have implemented data encryption within a lot of the products. So a lot of organizations are taking a step back and they're saying, well, this SED thing is pretty interesting. It's good encryption, and there's little to no overhead because all of the encryption, all the processing, et cetera, is done at the hardware level. So a lot of people, as you see in the advertisement down here, a lot of people are referring to SEDs as the best thing since sliced bread from a data protection standpoint. When we're finished the talk, I'll let you draw your own conclusions, but there's some pretty interesting research we're going to step through. And at this point, I think I'll hand it to Daniel to get into some of the meat and potatoes.
Sure thing. Right. So before we get into that interesting part of what are the problems we're seeing with SEDs, and specifically in an enterprise environment, let's take a step back and see where we're coming from. So before there were SEDs or SEDs, the way I'm going to call them throughout the presentation because it's just easier, there was the standard software-based encryption. So the classical full disk encryption, where it's actually something that's working on the computer, on the processor, that encrypts and decrypts the data on the fly, and that library or layer usually sits somewhere in the operating system. This type of encryption has a couple of advantages. It works regardless of the hardware that you have, meaning that it doesn't matter what model of hard drive you have, what model of laptop you have, it's going to work on all standard hardware. The application doesn't see that the encryption is in place. The operating system automatically handles that and hides that for anything that's application layer. There's a couple of disadvantages with the classical full disk encryption that is the software-based. One of them is the slow in-place encryption. So let's say you have a laptop with 1 terabyte of data and you decide that, yes, now I want to encrypt all the data that's there. You actually have to go through reading all of that data, encrypting it, and writing it encrypted on the hard drive. So that takes a lot of time, reading that data. And also, because this is done in the CPU and there's extra cycles there to encrypt and decrypt the data whenever we read and write, there's a slight performance overhead. Now with more modern processors, that's less of a problem. And also we have dedicated hardware in the processors that can help that, and some of the encryption products actually take advantage of that. So if we look at this diagram just to illustrate how software-based full disk encryption would work, what we have here at the left, this is the drive, and this can be a hard drive or an SSD, or it can be a thumb drive. For this particular example, let's assume this is the hard drive that's used to boot a machine. So what you'll find on that drive are typically two areas. There will be an area which is the pre-boot software, which is unencrypted. And there will be an area which is the user data. This is the part that's encrypted. So when the machine is powered on, it's the pre-boot software that's being loaded, whether that's TrueCrypt, BitLocker, or any other full disk encryption software. That one's being loaded. And then on the computer, you will have this software decryption layer that will be able to read the rest of the data, make sure the operating system loads and boots properly. And then once the operating system is loaded, the encrypted data, which is the actual operating system files and the user files and everything you would store on the drive, will be transmitted over the SATA interface encrypted. And then the computer, the CPU, will decrypt that data once it gets there and present it to the application and to the rest of the operating system in an unencrypted way. Now, this was software-based encryption. Now we're moving to hardware-based encryption. And when that encryption is done on the hard drive, that's what we call a self-encrypting drive, or a SED. So it's an actual component on the controller of the drive that's handling the crypto part. It's not happening in the processor anymore, not taking CPU cycles. It's done on the drive. Now, a couple of advantages here. Because the CPU and the OS doesn't have anything to do with it, obviously it doesn't have the performance overhead of software-based full disk encryption, so that's a great thing. There's instant in-place encryption. If you have a hard drive that's SED compatible, and you might have one and not realize that in your laptop, and you want to activate encryption, it's a matter of turning a switch, and poof, your hard drive will be encrypted right away. And we're going to get into the details of how that exactly works and how that's possible. But that's a big advantage. You don't have to wait for a couple of hours or less, depending on the speed of your drive, to actually encrypt the data on the drive. So just as for the software-based encryption for the applications, this is transparent, but also for the operating system, this is transparent. Once the unlocking part has been done, and we'll see that in a second, the operating system doesn't even know or doesn't even care that the drive is encrypted. Now, there's a couple of requirements. Obviously, you have to have a drive that's SED compatible. But also, in some cases, the motherboard has to support certain features. And there's also a management component. Just like with software-based encryption, there's the pre-boot authentication and a layer that sits there in the OS that manages how drive is encrypted, username and passwords, or recovery keys. SEDs also have a management component to them. Any disadvantages for SEDs? Anybody know of any disadvantages here in the room? You're not allowed to talk, Kevvie. But the way these products are being promoted, the SEDs are, like Kevvie mentioned, they have only advantages when compared to software-based full disk encryption, and no apparent disadvantages. So we should all be using them. And we'll see a couple of potential issues that we might have there in this talk. So we're looking at the same diagram, but now we're having a SED drive, self-encrypting drive. So here at the left, the SED also has an area which we'll call a system area, and depending on in what way the drive works, there would be different things stored in the system area. We'll get to that in a second. And then there's the user data section as well, which is encrypted. Now, the difference here is, like I mentioned, there's a crypto processor on the drive itself that has the job of encrypting and decrypting data. And then data travels through the SATA interface unencrypted. So on the data cable, and we have a couple of them, we'll probably do some demos with them, the data travels unencrypted. And then the operating system just sees that data and uses that as if it was a standard drive, as if the drive was not encrypted. And there's some management commands that are sent over the SATA channel to manage, activate encryption, change encryption keys, and so on. So in which ways can you manage a self-encrypting drives? You remember I mentioned there's a management component around the self-encrypting drives. The legacy way of doing this is what's called ATA or ATA security. So this is basically managing the self-encrypting drive, the encryption part, using standard commands that we were using before to lock and unlock drives. So this is the drives before there was encryption. There was a feature in some drives and a command subset for ATA where you could say, I want to lock the drive and only unlock the drive if you have a certain password, if I send the right password. So one way to bypass that was you can just remove the board, the controller from the drive, put in a new board, and then you would have the access to the data. Data would be unencrypted. Or just connect directly with the proper controller to the drive itself, bypass the controller altogether. Now, for SEDs, it's the exact same principle, the same commands to lock and unlock a drive, just that now data is encrypted on the drive. And the data will be encrypted based on the password that we send to unlock the drive. This is typically managed by the BIOS or the UEFI. Or if you're using some low-level tools like HDParm, you can check the status of a drive to see if it uses ATA encryption and activate or deactivate encryption. The downside about this, or one of the big downsides, is that the encryption is not standardized. Yes, the subset for commands define how the lock and unlock or authenticate commands will be sent, but after that, how the drive will decide or the vendor will decide to implement encryption in the drive itself really depends on what the vendor thinks might be the best option to do that. And not all of them use the same thing. But in general, if we look at it, the data on the drive is always encrypted with what's called the data encryption key or media encryption key, MEC. So when you have a drive that's in ATA security mode, usually from the factory, there will be a MEC, a media encryption key, and data will be encrypted with this key. And then the MEC itself will be encrypted with a KEK or key encryption key, and this key encryption key is derivated from the password. So when I'm unlocking a drive with a password, that password is used to generate a key, and that key unlocks the key that encrypts the data on the drive. And by default, it's just that this KEK is null or just zero. So that's why when the drives, the encryption is not activated, your data is actually encrypted on the drive. It's just that the key to decrypt the encryption key is just zeros. Now this was the legacy mode, the ATA security mode. What we're seeing now, and the more modern way of doing things, is using the Opal Standard, which is a standard from the Trusted Computing Group, the storage security subclass, system subclass. So the Opal is a new set of commands different than the ATA security commands that have been designed with the purpose of having encryption in place. So whereas the ATA, we were just porting old commands, legacy commands, this is something completely new. And one of the big advantages between Opal and ATA security is that Opals are meant to be managed by software. So we're not going to have the BIOS, when we power on the machine, ask for a hard drive password to type in. Instead, we're going to have software that's managing the encryption on the drive. And this is a big advantage for enterprise deployments because we can more easily manage software and decide, define recovery keys, decide what are the users that have access, synchronize, and all that good stuff. There's a pre-boot authentication that's happening, and if it's not in the BIOS, it's some software, and this is being loaded when the computer boots up through what's called an MBR shadowing mechanism. So once again, similar to the ATA security, data is always encrypted. It's just that this time the key encryption key is generated by the management software. Microsoft said that this looks all interesting, but we'd like to add a couple of requirements on top of the Opel standard. So they created what they're calling the Microsoft Encrypted Drive standard, or eDrive in short, which is Opel plus a couple of requirements. And the management software for this one is BitLocker. So you can use BitLocker to do standard software encryption, but you can also use BitLocker out of the box from a Windows machine to manage your self-encrypting drives. And this was, when I first discovered this, I said, whoa, this is amazing. I didn't know it was that easy to use. And if you're not aware of it, or if you're not careful, you might actually trigger a BitLocker in the self-encrypting drive mode, eDrive, without even noticing. And the operation is very similar to Opal. And then another category is for all of the drives that we see custom implementations. What's typical is the USB hard drives or the thumb drives that don't follow any of the standards. And there's usually either some software on the device itself that can manage the encryption. So a great example of that is the Western Digital drives, where you plug in the drive, you're going to see a CD pop up, you're going to run the application there, and that application is going to send the commands that will lock or unlock the drive or encrypt or decrypt the drive. But in some cases, there's a hardware component. There's drives, for example, that have a pin pad on them, and you actually have to type the password on the pin pad, on the hardware pin pad, and that will send the pin to the drive controller, which then will decrypt or encrypt the drive. We've seen 4 different ways in which SEDs can be managed. We'll focus on the Opal technology right here. Why? Because this is what we're seeing as a typical deployment in enterprise scenarios, because it's easier to manage, like I mentioned. From what we've seen as typical deployments also, BIOS is sometimes locked, sometimes not locked down. Users can sometimes go in and make changes. And there's usually not a lot of restriction on the power states of the machine, meaning obviously a machine can be on or off, but it's up to the user to decide whether they want to put a machine to sleep or they want to put it in hibernation mode. There's not a lot of enforcement around that. So the last thing before we go into actual attacks that we found out, let me talk briefly about the previous work. In the software encryption area, there's been attacks for recovering the encryption keys from the computer itself, so cold boot attacks or side channel attacks. Other techniques have been devised to bypass the Windows authentication. So the DMA attacks, for example, the Inception tool that you connect over the FireWire bus and you're just overriding memory and then you're bypassing the login screen. So if you have access to a machine with a login screen, even if the disk is full disk encrypted, if you can have access to the Windows session and have a user access, you can probably elevate yourself to admin privileges or anyway read the data that the user can read. And there's actually a talk that's going to happen tomorrow that guy over there is doing, which I just read the abstract, but it seems really fun, so you should probably go watch that as well. Those are, from my understanding, that's another technique to bypass the Windows authentication, so that will allow you to bypass the full disk encryption, such as BitLocker, that might be in place. And then there's the evil mate attacks, where you just switch the laptop or the drive by something else, where you have a piece of software that's loaded first, that captures the keys, and then that just triggers the standard boot method and feeds the key that it just captured. And at the same time, you're recovering that key either another visit or through another mechanism. So all that is work that has been done for the software full disk encryption mode. For the self-encrypting drives, there's 2 things that are worth mentioning. One is research for the ATA security mode, where Mueller discovered a technique that's called the hot plug attack, and we're going to explore that in the context of Opal, so I'm not going to say a lot about it right now. But we're going to see it in action. And then there's been research for the custom implementation. So the Western Digital paper that has been published a month or 2 ago by Allendal, and then there's the CISS company that did a bunch of research on proprietary encryption on USB thumb drives. What are we going to present here? We're going to present vulnerabilities that relate to SEDs when managed in enterprise environments. So that means the Opal mode and also eDrive from BitLocker, because that's readily available and it's very similar to Opal. And we're going to focus on laptop scenarios. You notice we have a couple of laptops here for the demos, but this is in theory applicable to other scenarios as well. You could take these attacks, maybe slightly extend them and use them in the context of SEDs that are used in a data center for servers. So now that we've established that we're going to talk about SEDs in Opal mode, if we see the details a bit of how those operate, I mentioned there was a system area. In the system area of a drive, what we usually have are the TCG tables. So this is where you have the media encryption key that it's self-encrypted, and you're going to have some configuration tables and settings and so on. Then there's the area which is the shadow MBR. This is where your software, your pre-boot authentication software will reside, and this is what's loaded when you power on your computer, and blue signifies that it's clear text, is not encrypted. And then at the end, you're going to have the user encrypted user data, which is encrypted and always encrypted, as I mentioned. And this data is encrypted with the MEC, the media encryption key. Now, this diagram is just a simplification of the actual details, but it turns out you can have multiple areas, and each of these areas to be encrypted with a different key. So you might have a scenario where you have theoretically 2 users that can log into a machine in the pre-boot authentication. And depending on the credentials that they log on with, they could see completely different drives and completely different data, and the other parts could be encrypted, so even a legitimate user would not see the data from the other user. The way the drives work, the Opel drives work, and it applies to some of the ATA security or custom implementations as well, is that the drives can typically be in 3 states. The first state is when the drive is off, it's powered off, so you have the drive sitting on the table. The drive is in a state that's called locked. So that means the media encryption key is encrypted, sits on the drive encrypted, but nowhere in the live memory of the controller. Then when you power on the drive's going to switch to an on mode, but also locked. So the drive just receives power. But at this state, it's only the MBR shadowing, the pre-boot software that is visible. The drive exposes this in a read-only mode. So if you power on the drive, you're not going to be able to alter the contents of the pre-boot. You're just going to be able to read that. And then the user will authenticate in this pre-boot software. And based on the management software, the software will either derive keys based on the username and password, or use the TPM, or whatever other mechanism is in place to obtain the key encryption key, decrypt the media encryption key, and then unlock the drive. So once the drive is unlocked, this is the state we want to be in. At that stage, the pre-boot authentication part becomes invisible. So the only thing that you will see is the user data, and over the SATA interface, this data will appear unencrypted. So even if you were to image the drive, let's say with some forensic tools, you would only see the user data, and that data would appear to be unencrypted. Now, the one thing that's very interesting is once you move the drive to the on-unlock state and you have access to the data, the drive will remain in that state until either one of the following conditions happen. Either you power off or power cycle the drive, so you remove the power, or you explicitly send the deauthentication command to the drive. So unless there's a deauth command sent to the drive, if you're maintaining power to the drive will remain unlocked. And the operating system or another operating system or another system will see the data on that drive. And this is what we will be exploiting. And at first it seemed weird that the drives operate that way, but in fact it turns out that if we go back to the Opel Standard, in the SC use cases and threats, the standard mentions that the use case is to protect the confidentiality of stored data against unauthorized access once it leaves the owner's control. And they describe that as involving a power cycle and subsequent deauth. So that means pretty much if you remove the drive from the laptop, or if you trigger a hard power off the laptop, that's when the Opal is meant to protect the drive. If you have your computer on, then Opal is not meant to protect the drive against that state. And as we'll see in a second, if you have your computer in sleep mode, even though the drive is powered off, Opal is not going to protect against that state. So what we're going to see here as the attacks are things that apply to our knowledge to all of the Opel deployments. We tested a couple of vendors for drives, Samsung, Seagate, hard drive, SSDs, different laptop models, different laptop brands, different management software, whether the laptop was on or in sleep mode, and found that this applies in all of those cases with a couple of exceptions. So it's not a problem with the way the vendors implemented the standard. There's not a flaw in the implementation or they're missing parts of the standard that they haven't implemented. It's just that the standard is not meant to protect against what we'll be showing here in this presentation. So we've seen a bit about how SEDs work. I talked about the previous work that's been done. Well, it turns out that some of the previous work that has been done for the software encryption also apply for the SEDs and specifically for the SEDs in Opel mode. So bypassing Windows authentication, if you have a laptop with a SED that's in sleep mode or powered on, if the screen is locked, and you're going to show us how we can bypass Windows authentication tomorrow, regardless of whether that's software encrypted or hardware encrypted, you're going to be able to have access to the data because you're logging in as the user and you're reading that data. Evil meta attacks, once again, can be made to work for self-encrypting drives as well. And then the work from Mueller for ATA security mode, the hot plug attack, it turns out that it also works for Opel drives. So let's see that type of attack in particular before we show you the 3 other attacks that we devised that are new to our knowledge. So how the hot plug attack works is if the laptop is on, first thing that you do is just put it to sleep. Just put it in sleep mode. And at this state, when you change the drive from on to sleep mode, the drive's going to get powered off. Some components of the laptop will remain powered on, memory will be refreshed, but the drive is powered off. So the drive will switch to an off and locked state. So then what you do is you remove the drive from the laptop. So now the laptop is still in off and lock state. You install a bunch of SATA extension cables because you want to play with the connectors on the drive and there's not enough room and space to do that in the laptop. And then you wake up the machine from sleep. So when you wake it up from sleep, first thing, the drive's going to receive power. So it switches to on and locked. And then the software that's being in memory when you wake up the machine will automatically unlock the drive. And once again, depending on the management software that you're using, it can either be a password that's stored somewhere in memory, obfuscated or not. It can be a combination of using the TPM to gain access to the keys. It could potentially even use some network communication, although we haven't really seen that. Doesn't matter how it happens. In all the cases that we've seen, the software automatically unlocks the drive when you wake it up from sleep mode because you're going to have to log into Windows anyway. So there's a login screen there. The software is going to decrypt the drive or unlock the drive automatically though. So now we have the drive in the blue on unlock state. At this stage, we have the drive out with extension cables. We're going to keep power to it. We're just going to switch the SATA connection. And poof, when you switch the connection, you're going to have access to the machine, to the drive actually. So I'm going to go and attempt a demo. I've been said that demos at Black Hat are meant to fail, but I've also said that people expect demos and they expect them to fail. So let's see, this is probably going to be fun. So I have a setup here with a camera, and I'm going to show you the work that I'm going to do on a laptop. So let's set that up first. Okay. So what demo we're doing first? Okay, yeah. So what I have here, this is the test laptop that we will be using, and I have also this yellow box here, which is a USB to SATA interface that we're going to use to gain access to the drive. And then I'm just going to open Explorer here, which is where we're hopefully going to see the drive appear. Okay, so let's start. This is the laptop with the SED that's configured. I'm just going to show you power on the laptop. This is the pre-boot authentication. So in this case, we're having BitLocker with TPM and PIN setup. So I'm just going to, oops, that's not the right PIN. So we can see right away why demos fail. Incorrect PIN. Okay, this is the right PIN. There we go. So now we're into Windows. I have my John Smith user. So let's first just see if this is an old version of Windows. It looks like Windows 10. There's updates that have been applied as of last night, 12.14. So it seems to be pretty recent, all patched up. The drive is encrypted with BitLocker. How can you tell? You see this lock sign over here. But if you don't believe me, we can see the details by running the manage BDE command. So this is where we see that the drive is encrypted. Let me just try to adjust this a bit so we see it better. So we see that the drive is fully encrypted. Hardware encryption, which means the drive is in eDrive mode, so it's not software-based encryption. Protection on, and lock status unlocked. So the drive right now is in the on and unlock state. So this is what a normal user would do, power on their machine, and the user has a document on their desktop. This is the document that we're going to try to access, which is a sample file. So then the user will lock their machine and either put it to sleep or leave it on. Me as the attacker, I step in, I find the machine. If I find the machine on, I'm just going to put the machine to sleep. If the machine is in sleep mode, no problem, I'm just going to use it that way. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to install extension cables. Let me just move this laptop out of the way for now. So I'm going to open the drive compartment. I replaced the screws with duct tape because if you're just opening it every 5 minutes, it's easier to remove. I'm going to get my drive out, set it here for now. So I have this extension cable. This is data and power extension cable. We only need the data, but that's the longer ones have data and power that I found, so I'm just going to use those. This is where you want to use duct tape as well for your cables, because if you remove the cables while you're trying to do the demo at Black Hat, trust me, it's not going to work. So what I'm going to do now is from this cable that came from the laptop, I'm just going to plug the data connection to the drive. And this is where I'll be using my external USB to SATA adapter. And for now, I will just be supplying power to the drive from this adapter. So I turn this on, I'm supplying power. Now the data is still connected to the laptop. So powering on. The laptop powered on. So this is where the drive gets unlocked. And now what we do is I will remove the SATA data. We don't need the laptop anymore. Nothing's connected to the laptop. The drive's not there. If I try to log in, the laptop will either freeze or crash. And this is where I plug in the data to my USB adapter. You hear the bling, bling, bling. The drive appears here. Oh, you see the other laptop crashed. Doesn't matter. I have access to the drive. And now I can go in that user's desktop. And I have access to that drive right now, even though the drive was encrypted. So this is something, like I mentioned, that wasn't new. We didn't introduce this. This was something that was first presented by Mueller. What was interesting is that in their research, they found that all of the laptops were vulnerable except for Lenovo laptops. And the Lenovo laptops were not, the modern ones. They detected when the drive was removed, the SATA data cable was removed from the laptop while the laptop was in sleep mode. And what we found is that for Opel drives, that's not the case. We confirmed that in ATA security mode, yes, the Lenovo laptops do that. But for Opel drives, you don't have that protection. And what's the reason for that? Is ATA security drives, it's the BIOS that's unlocking or locking the drive. So the laptop can easily decide not to unlock the drive anymore if it detects that the SATA cable has been switched. But for Opel drives, is the management software. In this case, it was BitLocker in Windows that was resumed from sleep that unlocked the drive. So the laptop itself didn't really have anything to say there of what to do. Well, there are actually a couple of things that can be done from a user perspective. First thing to do is if you leave your laptop unattended, don't leave your laptop on or in sleep mode. Power it off or hibernate it. IT administrators, they can consider disabling the sleep mode or restricting the sleep mode. For example, the laptop can be in sleep mode, but not for more than 15 minutes or 10 minutes, just for walking around from one meeting room to another. Or there can be some geographical fencing. So if you get out of the office or you're on that network, then laptop's going to power off or hibernate right away. The laptop manufacturers, even though the drive is not in ATA security mode, could attempt to detect if a drive was removed while the laptop was in sleep mode. and then if that's the case, triggered a hard reset of the machine, power cycled the drive, and flush the memory. So that way the software is not loaded and the software would not unlock automatically the drive. And then the SED manufacturers could consider detecting when we're switching the SATA data cable from one computer to the other. And if they detect that while the drive is powered on, to lock the drive so that way the data is not accessible there anymore. So this was something that was not new. Now we're going to see 3 other techniques, but just one of them will be a demo because we don't have a lot of time of other things we can do. The next one is a forced restart attack. So in this case, if the laptop is in sleep mode, we're just going to wake the laptop up. We want to have the laptop running. Then we're going to trigger a soft reset. The drive will be on in unlocked mode at this state. Then we're going to boot from a different source. And then we're going to have access to the data. So you're going to ask, how are you triggering a soft reset on the laptop? On the desktops, it's pretty easy. A lot of the times you have a button to trigger a reset. That's called the hard reset, though. But on a laptop, how would you go around that? Well, it turns out that there's a tool, a face dancer, and we're going to see a demo of this one right here, that can sniff and replay USB traffic. And there's a fellow, Andy Davis from the NCC group, that presented a tool at Black Hat last year, UMAP, that can actually emulate USB devices from Python directly from this hardware gadget. And there are a couple of bugs in modern operating systems where if you have physical access to a machine, to a USB port, you can send some USB commands that are going to trigger a restart and crash the machine. There's also the option of just shorting some memory pins. I've done that multiple times. I didn't break anything in the computer, but just a word of caution, you might fry the memory stick or the motherboard. One of our colleagues, Danny Garwood, actually saw me playing with the screwdriver inside the computer, and he said, why don't you just remove the memory stick? And yes, it turns out that removing the memory stick has less chances of damaging something, the components, and it triggers a soft reset as well in most cases. So good luck applying a patch for that. We've seen a couple of cases where just by plugging a gaming keyboard with a mouse in a USB DVI and switching from one port to the other just consistently triggers crashes in Windows. And then there's a feature in Windows where you can actually trigger a crash, a control crash, control scroll lock. You have to be an admin and change your registry key, but this is something really helpful if you're doing testing and want to see how your computer behaves, especially in the context of SEDs, if you're triggering a crash. So we're going to see the second demo, which is the blue screen of death. It's easy just to remove a memory stick. We're going to do the fun one, though, with the face dancer, and we're going to cause a crash of the machine. Now, there's a paper that comes with our research that will be published on the Black Hat site that actually describes the commands that you can run and the actual test cases from UMAP that you can use to crash a fully patched Windows 8.1 Enterprise. I tested all of those before coming here to Amsterdam, and all of them still appear to work on Windows 8.1 Enterprise. However, none of them work on Windows 10. It turns out, though, that there is another test case in that tool, in the UMAP, that can crash a Windows 10. Now, the code that crashes the Windows 10 fully patched was not disclosed in the responsible disclosure in the article, so I'm going to mask some of the values here, but we're still going to see a fully patched Windows 10 crash and access to the SED. So this is my computer. I'm logging in. Just as before. Let's just see the Windows update. So up to date as of last night. And same thing here. The hard drive is encrypted. So let me just prepare my face dancer tool. Make sure it's connected to my VM. Sorry about that. So the machine is locked. What I will do is connect the phase dancer. Just run it with the option to run the test case that can crash a Windows 10. It emulates a certain device, runs the test case, and poof, the device has been crashed. And now I was not prepared. I actually have to hit F12 to trigger a boot from an alternative source. And this is where I'm plugging a USB thumb drive to the machine. So we're going to see the machine restart. Multitasking here. You notice that I got a big camera with a focus ring so that I can have another thing to play with while I'm doing the demo. So booting from the alternative source. This is an Ubuntu. This is an older laptop, so it's a bit slower to boot, but we're going to get there. So right now, while all of this is happening, the drive was always on and was always in an unlock state. So let me just increase the font size. So if I just list the partitions that I have and the drives that I have, I can see that SDA4, this is my data partition from the Windows 10. So I'm just going to mount it. And I'm going to cat the file. So there we go. We have access to the file system again. So we found that all of the classic or just the Opal configurations were vulnerable to this, the ones that we tested. It was interesting to see that the Lenovo laptops, when used with an E drive, are not vulnerable. So whenever the machine is even soft reset, and we go through the process of choosing a different boot method, if we're using an E drive, the drive will get locked, and you will not be able to use this technique in that scenario. What can you do as a user? Again, the same thing. IT administrators can change the setting that's by default in Windows to automatically restart if there's a crash, a kernel crash. So you could remove that, so that way your users, when they come back to work in the morning, they will see the nice crashes on their machines. Also, BIOS was not locked down here. Not only could I go into BIOS and change settings, by default I can use the key to choose a different boot method. Make sure to disable those, the USB devices, external devices, network boot is something that we usually see on, so disable those as well. And then there's the recommendations from the laptop manufacturers to force a power cycle on the drive when the machine is being restarted. And also the OS developers to reconsider the impact of vulnerabilities that can crash a machine when you have local access to the machine, because right now in the context of SEDs, we can read the data on the drive that way. Another technique is the hot unplug attack. So the hot unplug attack is just like the hot plug attack, but on steroids. So suppose a laptop manufacturer comes up with a way to detect that the SATA extension cable is plugged in while the drive is in sleep mode and blocks you from doing that. What you can actually do is the following. You expose the SATA pins from a drive in the laptop compartment. So what you would do is you have the drive here with just the cover off. You slightly pull it over. You can see the pins. And then you force supply power to the drive while it's in this mode. I just took a SATA extension, peeled off the plastic to have access to the pins. And then you put this on the drive. I have data and power here, but I'm only supplying power at this point. And now with the power supply to the drive, you remove the drive from the case, from the laptop. and then you just connect the SATA data cable, and once again you have access. This is a bit tricky. Make sure to place your pins at the right spot. I burnt a drive when I was just one pin off and sending power on the wrong pins, so just be warned. We just tested this on one drive, the other one we burned, and the 512 and the 1 terabyte SSDs were too precious to destroy this way, but we don't expect any of the configurations to not be vulnerable to this. Anything that is vulnerable to the other attack, the hot plug would be vulnerable to this one as well. And pretty much the same recommendations here for the users and the laptop manufacturers, as well as the SED drives to detect when we're switching the SATA data cable. And finally, the last technique, the key capture attack. This is something that we just present theoretically. We haven't actually tested it, but the idea behind this is to capture the key that's being sent to the drive to unlock the drive, capturing that authentication command. So one way of doing that would be just get a hard drive that you can flash the firmware of and have your own firmware there. Have it masquerade as a legitimate drive, so send the same serial number, model, size, and so on. And then capture the commands with the key encryption key, store that somewhere, and then use that to unlock your drive. So either do it that way or use a SATA sniffer for the actual drive when that's being unlocked. You want, in any way, you will get the key, and then you'll be able to unlock the drive how many times you want. We've seen a couple of ways in which you can attack SEDs. Like Kevin mentioned, we've seen a couple of mitigations as well, but if you ask yourself the question, have I been hacked, have I been attacked, have I been popped? If we look at the 4 attacks, it turns out that it's very difficult to find out if you've been under attack. The hot plug unplug and the key capture leave no traces or traces just similar to some hardware malfunction. The forced restart attack can leave the traces of the blue screen of death, and you will have the Windows event logs and memory dumps. But at the end of the day, if the attacker gets access to the drive and manages to unlock it, they can clean up any of those traces. So when they put the drive back, you're not going to know that there was a problem with the drive. So finally, before we wrap up, a couple of words on the responsible disclosure. We've been in communication with the TCG, Trusted Computing Group, disclosed the findings on July 15th. And by common agreement, they took the task of sharing all of this information or the relevant parts of this information with all of the members from the storage work group. We've also worked with CERT to disclose the vulnerability. We've been assigned a vulnerability note from them and 3 CVs for the attacks that we have actually shown that worked, not the theoretical one. And then Lenovo were kind enough to contact us and say, oh, we want to know more about this. How does this work? And how about those details? And we had a couple of discussions with them on potential mitigations that they might deploy in the future in their laptops.
Thanks, Daniel. With looking at the demos, when everyone returns back to your organizations after the conference and your organizational management asks, you saw a lot of new attacks, what do we need to be secure as part of the 2016 budgets? Make sure to state you need a face dancer and duct tape, as Daniel showed. If anyone actually has the guts to do that, let us know what the response is from your management team. Reach out to us via social media or email. So I'm going to try to not stand in front of the slide here. But when we look at this vulnerability, it's interesting. The exploits that were shown here were primarily focused on enterprise environments and specifically at laptops. And when trying to find information on what the impact of such vulnerabilities would be, there's an older study that actually, it's cut off here, but it's by the Ponemon Institute and Intel regarding laptops. So number 1, we see the circle here, 263 laptops stolen each year per organization. And that's on average based on a complex simulation or a complex survey is the word I'm looking for, a complex survey that they executed. And the cost based on replacing the hardware and based on the information that was on the laptop was just under $50,000. And this study was from a few years ago if we look at it. So there's been quite a few changes since that study was put out. And if we see on this side, the number of laptops has increased in terms of the number of devices in use within the organization, as well as the cost for each incident has definitely gone up. And the primary reason for that is, number 1, the size of the disk in the data sets, looking specifically at the amount of money per loss based on an incident. Laptops have bigger drives, a lot of people have more sensitive information. The cost associated with this information has definitely gone up. The value of the sensitive information as well has increased, and there's also a bigger requirement for organizations to actually notify people in the event of an intrusion than there were when the study came out. So in terms of impact specifically, number one, organizations who have suffered, whether it's a loss or a theft of a laptop, who do have SEDs, who assume that you know what, the information was protected, you may need to revisit some of those cases. And whether that's external and you went through legal, whether this was a public breach, or whether this is just an internal or an HR issue, that's something to look at as well, is what's the likelihood of someone leveraging some of this information to actually go back and get access to the information that you thought was protected. And as well, you can expect to see an increase in the number of laptop thefts that we're seeing in the industry. Because again, these self-encrypting drives and similar technology has been put out there. Organizations have been investing in them because, again, there was no downside. As we've seen in some of the attacks Daniel has shown, there were quite a few downsides associated with the technology. Now, as part of targeted attacks, I can target one of the administrators. We heard that in the keynote today. And if you can get admin privileges, what organization wouldn't fall victim to that? So you can actually find individuals targeting these laptops. You can get access to the drive, and you can now start to carve out the credentials from the drive and use the credentials to actually execute a more sophisticated attack. So you can expect to see the number of laptop-related incidents rise, as well as the cost associated with the information on these drives. Do you want to cover some sound bites? And I just got the 5-minute warning, and she's looking kind of angry, so we got to be on time.
So the format for the Black Hat conferences is that at the end there will be 3 sound bites for each conference. So the ones that you can, the 3 key points you can take away from this conference is that SEDs in typical enterprise deployments, which is Opal, are insecure by design when the laptop is on or in sleep mode. That's just how they've been designed. The standard has been designed. There's things you can do around it to mitigate the risk, things that users can do, things that IT administrators can do, and definitely in the future, things that can be done by the industry to improve the situation. But if you are worried that you might have been attacked or your organization might have been under attack and the data on the drive has been compromised, there's very little you can do to actually detect that or prove that you've been under that attack. So you're better off protecting in the first place because you're not going to be able to tell that you've been attacked or not after the fact. And I believe we have 2 minutes or so for questions now. Anybody has any questions? Yes, question in the back?
Yeah, you said earlier that if the cable is disconnected, some laptops will detect that and then will force a reboot cycle.
So
how is it actually detected when you're in sleep mode? Is that still powered on or is this some static detection?
the question was surrounding some laptops that might detect the SATA cable, SATA data cable being changed when the laptop is in sleep mode and then not unlocking the drive. So just to clarify, that is the case right now for Lenovo laptops for drives using ATA security mode. For Opel drives, that's not being implemented. How is that exactly that's being done? I don't have all of the details, but my suspicion is that the memory is refreshed. There's still some power going through the drive controller, and it's the drive controller. There's some mechanism there that detects that the connection has been changed. It's not a physical thing where you have a button that detects that you've changed that. Even if you have that disconnection of the SATA data on an extension plug somewhere further away from the laptop, it will still get detected. So it's somewhere at the electrical layer that you can detect you no longer have the contact with the drive, electrical contact.
Since you're into forensics, is there any forensic evidence you saw while doing this that created this?
So the question was, is there any forensic evidence that we can look at or see that would show that this attack was done? As I mentioned a couple of slides ago, there are some things that are left behind, especially if you're triggering the blue screen of death. You could see that, yes, there's evidence that the machine crashed and it crashed with this code. Now, if the attacker is sloppy, that might be left behind. But if the attacker has access to the drive, the attacker can just clean that up. So no, we haven't really seen any of those telltale signs. and I've just been shown the 0 minutes sign. If you have any questions, feel free to grab us after the talk. More than happy to answer them. Thank you.